Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Well, less than 24 hours after we broadcast revelations about the scale of sexual harassment in Westminster, the Conservative Party has moved swiftly to send its MPs a new code of conduct. It's been drawn up by the Conservative Chief Whip, Sir George Young, who describes it as a basic statement of what should be best practice in the workplace. But not a single MP will be obliged to sign up to it. And parliamentary staff will be able to access it only if the politician they work for has adopted it. So, as I've been hearing further claims about harassment and bullying, will a voluntary code make any difference? David Cameron was in Wales today praising enterprising staff at a furniture factory. But it's the treatment of parliamentary staff by Tory MPs that's coming under scrutiny after this programme's revelations about sexual harassment last night. The Prime Minister has endorsed a new code of conduct released by his Chief Whip following our report. But there are concerns the new guidelines don't go far enough, with staff fearful of the power of MPs.
We've had instances where staff have been told, "I will ruin you," by the MP as the employer. I mean, that's a very real threat. If you're young and new to the workplace and you're not fully aware of your rights, that's a terrifying prospect, so you don't want to take a complaint any further. But also, MPs are very powerful people with huge networks, and that has very real consequences.
The Code of Conduct, which has been sent to Channel 4 News, says MPs should treat their employees with dignity, respect and courtesy, and staff should be free from any form of discrimination, victimisation, harassment or bullying. But a covering letter from the Chief Whip, Sir George Young, makes clear any complaints from employees can't be dealt with by the party, but are entirely a matter for you, the MP, to handle. So parliamentary staff facing abuse from MPs may end up having to complain to the very person harassing them.
The law gives you the right not to be sexually harassed at work. That's not a voluntary code. That's the law that applies to everybody and all employers.
What's more, common staffers have told us they're not allowed to request the new code of conduct to check their rights, but instead have to rely on MPs passing it on to them. Well, there's no doubt that Parliament is rushing to get its own house in order. I understand the Cross-Party Standards Committee will meet later this month to agree a new respect policy to apply to MPs and Commons employees. But the ability of politicians to police themselves has been seriously undermined by successive scandals over expenses, culminating just this week in the resignation of the Culture Secretary, Maria Miller. So now many victims of sexual harassment are rather doubtful that MPs are capable of marking their own copybook on this too.
When I had left and moved to my new job...
Last night we broadcast an investigation based on interviews with 70 men and women working in Westminster from across the political spectrum.
The MP suggested we go to the toilets at about 1 a.m.
More men than women said they'd experienced sexual harassment. 40% of men said they'd had unwanted sexual advances. And tonight we reveal testimony from further victims.
He just touched my bum and put his fingers at the top of my pants. I didn't report it, as a lot of people were there to witness it. I just put it down to the Westminster bubble.
I know there are people who've slept with people to get a job. Nobody else speaks out against these things because you don't want to be seen as stepping out of line. You don't want to be disloyal or embarrass the party.
I think the powerful use the fact that if people speak up, it'll reflect badly on their careers. No one complains. It's just crap. It's just part of the culture. You just become numb to it and accept it.
People are flattered by the attention from MPs. It's like they're rock stars in their world.
Following our investigation, the Director of Public Prosecutions is urging all those who have experienced harassment in Westminster to report it to the police.
If people feel that they have been subject to assaults, then they should think about whether they need to go to the police, and we will support them through that process.
The Labour Party told us they'd be introducing an independent complaints process after Easter. And the Liberal Democrats have told us they're confident that new processes introduced after the Lord Renaud allegations are robust and they'll keep them under review.
My boss did try it on with me when he was drunk.
But many of the victims we spoke to fear the culture of harassment in Parliament is so entrenched, these new policies are barely worth the paper they're written on. Well, I'm joined now from her West Midlands constituency by Conservative MP Margot James, and here by Lucille Harvey of the Unite Union, who you briefly saw in my report there. Well, Margot, I'll ruin you. What more than one MP has told staffers who complain of harassment?
Well, I think that's a despicable attitude, and I'm quite sure that's not commonplace. But of course, you know, I wouldn't question what those employees have said, because I think what we're talking about here really is an abuse of power. It's an abuse of position, and it reveals a bullying mentality, I think. And you know, if people are prepared to bully their staff sexually or in other ways, then I'm afraid that kind of threat you've just outlined, Kathy, would be probably the next step of someone like that.
Well, let me go to Lucille Harvey. How widespread do you think this kind of bullying is? I mean, there are 650 MPs. Is it that commonplace?
The problem is we don't know the full extent because there is no procedure in place for people to complain. So we'll never be fully aware of the true extent of the problem. From what we see in the branch, this isn't a few rogue MPs. There is a culture here that needs to be challenged, and that's what we'd say.
Margot, a culture that needs to be challenged. This is not just a few rogue MPs. Do you accept that?
Well, I wouldn't say that the kind of people who would say, you know, I'll ruin your career. I don't think that is at all common. I would think that kind of attitude is probably a few rogue MPs. However, I do think there is an issue with the culture. I saw your report last night, and I think you had enough witnesses and enough people who I would trust talking about that culture. And although I haven't myself actually seen or experienced any signs of it, I wouldn't deny that it existed, having seen your film last night. I think it is a problem, and I think we need to address it, which is why the Conservative Party have issued its grievances procedure for MPs to adopt today.
Well, is that voluntary code of conduct going to make much difference, given that MPs are going to be handling the complaints? So potentially you've got staff being harassed, complaining to the very person who's harassing them.
Well, I think it's a good start, and it's not only, I mean, the procedure does start with the employee taking up the issue with the MP who employs him or her, but there's also recourse to a panel of senior party members who are many of them who are not even MPs themselves,
a good start,
who are going to be able to offer pastoral care, and that an individual employee could approach one of that committee in confidence. And the Speaker has also established a telephone line as well.
Sorry to interrupt, but a good start that needs to be beefed up, you think?
Well, I think it is a very good start. I mean, I've read it in some detail, and I think it conforms to best HR practice, and I think it is a very good start. And the party have committed to reviewing the way it operates at the beginning of next year. So it's like a sort of 8-month trial period, if you like. But it does depend on MPs taking it up. And that aspect of it is voluntary. I would agree with you there. I shall certainly take it up, and I'm sure a lot of my colleagues will.
OK, Lucille Harvey, is this code of conduct going to help at all?
It's a start, but it's a very small start. This isn't a partisan problem, it's a cultural problem, so we need an across-the-board sexual harassment policy that covers all staff. What happens if you're not a Conservative, don't work for a Conservative MP, and you face harassment? So just bad luck for you. All staff need to have the same protections in the workplace. And the point I'd make about a few rogue MPs, the branch recently did a survey this month of staff, and we found 20% of staff who completed our survey were victims said they faced harassment in the workplace. So it's not just a few rogue MPs, this is a prevalent problem.
Briefly, Margot, this is too big a problem with too serious implications for MPs surely to be trusted to police themselves. We saw what happened over expenses. There's a risk here that MPs won't be able to deal with harassment themselves as well.
Well, I mean, we shouldn't forget that this code of conduct and grievance procedure does not take place in a vacuum. I mean, employees have their legal rights under employment law, And I would accept that most employees don't want to go down that course straight away. And this grievance procedure is a means of bridging that. But I do accept that it is a real problem and that we may have to strengthen things, and there may need to be a recourse to an independent body in time for staff and employees. People have to be protected from the kind of abusive behaviour that your report revealed last night.
Margot James, thank you very much for joining us, and Lucille Harvey in the studio. Thank you.